Hello friends! You can just start Tahoma2D and start drawing, but do you know what type of drawing you're going to get and what features it has over the other types? And did you know there are 3 types of drawings you can make and each has its own set of features and intended purpose? Well, let's take a look. So the TLDR is that I use raster levels for painterly style backgrounds, smart raster levels for characters, and vector levels for areas with gradient fills or for drawing lines that I can later adjust, and to use the auto in-betweening tool. So let's see some of this in more detail, how you get to those 3 types and some basic drawing tips to get you started. So first I'll create a new project and I'll call this drawing levels. And notice drawing levels is now the current project, so let's create a new scene, and I'll just call this demo. I'll leave the standard HD resolution and 24 frames a second. So hit create scene. And with the scene created, I can just choose the brush tool and then start drawing. And you'll see your drawing in the viewer and a new layer appear on the timeline. And that's this row here, called A on the left hand side, which is the name of the level that's been created, and a box here in frame 1 called A1. That's drawing number 1 and it's shown in frame number 1. And I'll talk more about the timeline and what all this means another time, but just know that you can just start drawing if you want to draw in the default level type. But what is the default level type? Well, that's set up in the preferences. So if you go to the preferences dialog, in the drawing section, and here at the top you'll see the default level type is a raster level, and you can change that to be a smart raster level or a vector level if you prefer. So you have the option of which level type is used with this technique, and if you like you can stop the ability to create new drawing levels when you're drawing a blank frame by unticking the enable auto creation option here. But whether you untick this or not, my recommendation is to not use the auto creation of levels like this until you fully understand the level types and are working on a project where you'll find this will speed up your process. My recommendation is to create levels manually. And there's 2 ways to do that. But first let me remove this level by undoing it. So from the edit menu choose undo, or you can use the keyboard shortcut Ctrl-Z. So the first way is to create a new level from the level menu in the new flyout, and you can choose new raster level, smart raster level or vector level. And I'll talk about note levels another time, but these are the 3 drawing levels that you might want to choose. Or instead of using the menu, you can choose one of the 3 buttons here at the top of the timeline. And as you hover over them, you'll see a brief description of the level in the status bar. And if you wait a few seconds, you'll see a tooltip appear so you know exactly which button creates which level. But what is a drawing level? A drawing level is a way to group related drawings. So I like to think of a level as a stack of paper, and each piece of paper is a drawing in that level. And each stack can be used for a different character, or for a set of mouth shapes for lip sync for instance, or perhaps for all of your backgrounds that you'll use in a scene or in your project. So it's a way to organise your drawings in an animation, which also makes it easier to reuse drawings, either in the same scene or across scenes in your project. And this is especially useful for repeating actions like run cycles or lip sync for instance. So just click one of the 3 buttons here to get the pop-up for that level type. And when it pops up, if you realise you chose the wrong type, you can always change the type here. So I'll create one of each level type now so you can see some of the differences, starting with the standard raster level. And there's a few options on this dialog to take a look at. Notice that you'll be given a unique name for this drawing level, which is starting off at the letter B. And you can change it, but as I mentioned in an earlier video, all of the drawing levels are stored in the same folder on disk. So each drawing level has to have a unique name within that folder. So name levels only if you're sure that the name will be unique. And I generally tend not to name levels unless I know that I'm going to be sharing them with another scene. But I will name this one so it's clearer which level type this is. And I'll call this just with the letter R for a raster level. And the size of the drawing for raster and smart raster levels is set to the size of the camera for the scene, which for this scene, if you remember, was standard HD 1920 by 1080. And you can change it here if you want a larger image, perhaps for a scrolling background, or if you're going to zoom into this image and still want the drawing to remain clear. Or you can choose a smaller one if you know you don't need a large drawing. And the final useful thing on here to mention is that the standard raster drawings are stored in the extras folder in your project. So let's create that by just clicking OK. And you'll see your new level appear here on the timeline, with the first blank drawing in frame 1 named R1. That's the name of the level R and the drawing number 1. So let's add a smart raster level by clicking the second button here at the top of the timeline. And you'll see it has the same options, but this time the level is saved in the drawings folder. And I'll name this level SR for smart raster. And press OK. And then finally, a vector level. Pressing the third button, you see the vector level options here. And notice the vector level doesn't have a size that you can change because you can draw vectors anywhere on or around the camera area. And I'll rename this to V for vector level. And press OK. So now we've got 3 drawing levels created, each shown in a different colour. So once you get used to these, you'll be able to spot them at a glance. And do notice that although I've created 1 drawing level of each type for the demo here, you can and should mix levels in your animations so that you use the right level type for the right type of drawing. But why would you use each drawing level type? Well, everyone's different, but let me give you my opinion for the best use for each level type. So starting with raster levels, select on the first drawing in the timeline of the raster level, and then select the brush tool. And you can change some of the brush options at the top of the screen here. So let's change the size just by dragging the sliders, or you can click in the box and type a new number for the size. And you have a minimum and maximum size to be used when using a drawing tablet that has a pressure sensitive stylus, as I have today. And notice that the second entry in your drawing palette here, the black entry, is already selected. So now we can just start drawing. And if we want a different colour, we can just change it by clicking in the triangle here to adjust the saturation and value. And then in the hexagon, we can adjust the hue to change the colour. And you can see this more clearly by showing the hue, saturation and value sliders from the colour menu here at the bottom right. Just choose the HSV option. And now as you change the colour, you'll notice the sliders move, showing exactly the hue, saturation and value. And now we can draw with this new colour. And then perhaps change it again. And perhaps it's not bright enough or blue enough, so we can change the sliders to change the settings, as well as changing them at the top here. And this is like Bob Ross mixing these colours together on his palette, which is a nice way to find the right colour. But like Bob Ross, you can also keep your mixed colours separate so that you can go back and use a previous colour. So to do that, just click the plus button next to the last colour to create a new palette entry. And notice that it copies the last colour that you had selected. And then you can adjust this new colour and then use it. Perhaps make it a little lighter. Or change it altogether. But now you can go back to your previous colour to paint with if you want to. And one thing to remember here, like most painting programs, once you've painted the colour onto the drawing on a raster level, the colour on screen doesn't change as you edit the palette entry. But with the other 2 level types, they do. So this makes the raster level perfect if you painted lots of colours onto the drawing, but don't necessarily want to create new spaces in your palette for each one, which is what you might want for a more painterly background. You don't necessarily want to create a new palette entry for each shade of colour that you use. The raster level also gives you access to the full set of brushes in the Raster Brushes tab, which gives you different patterns, textures and styles to paint with. And using this, it is useful to add new palette entries to switch back and forth between brushes. And some of my favourites are the airbrush, the charcoal brush and the pencil. so do take some time and have a play with them to find your favourites. And I'll show you some of these in the coming videos, so do be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And do tell me in the comments which brushes you find the most useful. And one last thing to note, the raster palette that you set up here will be used for all raster levels in this scene. So if you create another raster level, you'll get the same brushes already set up, which can be quite handy. So raster levels are great for painting backgrounds, but you can also use them for drawing your characters, but I find the better level type for drawing characters is the smart raster levels. So before I start, I'm going to temporarily hide the raster level I've just been drawing on by clicking the table button to the left of the raster layer. And now you won't be able to see any drawings from this layer. And you can show them again just by clicking the same area, but let's leave them off for now. So again, start working with a different drawing in the timeline, select the smart raster level drawing that you want to draw on, and with the brush still selected, I can just start drawing again. Again, we can change the size of the brush and get a different thickness of line depending how hard you press on your tablet. And if we want to draw in a different colour, we can add a new palette entry, as we did for the raster levels. Again, notice it copies the same black colour over. Let's choose a bright red colour and draw with that. But if we change the colour for this palette entry, something special happens. The colour on screen is locked to this palette entry. So not only does the palette entry change colour, but where you've drawn on screen with that palette entry also changes too. And this is really useful for adjusting colours after you've painted with them, and this applies to any drawing in this level that uses this palette entry. So it's a really good way to adjust a colour that's on screen in front of your background or next to your other characters. And that makes it a much easier way to choose a colour rather than just looking at the small square in your palette entry. But this does mean that you have to have a new palette entry for every colour that you use on smart raster levels. Finally, like on the raster level, you can use most of the brushes in the raster tab, but be aware that not all of the brushes work on the smart raster level. The smudging, blurring and erasing brushes don't work because they rely on creating many different colours, which the smart raster can't handle in a single palette entry. So if you need all of these brushes, stick with the standard raster level. So let's remove all of this by clicking undo a few times. And as I said, you can do this from the edit menu or just press Ctrl Z a few times. And then before I go any further, let me save this scene, and we'll do that from the file menu, choosing Save All or pressing Ctrl S. Now there are other save options that you find in submenus or elsewhere, but choosing to save all ensures that you save all of the drawings and their timing on the timeline. So always choose Save All. Okay, so let me draw a very simple character. And then adding new palette entries and colours, let's colour him in. Let's add a colour for his trousers, make it like a dark blue colour, and one for his top. Let's make it a lighter blue, and one for his face, which I'll make kind of an orangey colour there. So there's two ways to colour him in, and the easiest is with the bucket fill tool. So choose that from the left hand side here, and with the normal type selected, and the mode set to areas, you can fill the area in normally as you would in any other drawing program, provided the area is a closed shape. So choose the colour, click anywhere in the open space, and that'll fill that area in. Choose the next colour and click again. And the second way is useful if the shape isn't closed, and that's by using the Smart Raster Paint tool that you find here in the tool menu. So as with the normal brush tool, you can choose the size of the brush, which can change from smaller through to quite large. Make sure you selected the areas mode and the palette entry for the colour you want to paint with, and then you paint as you normally would. And notice that if I go over the lines, that the paint goes behind the lines. Well, how does Tahoma2D know to do that? Well, anything you draw with a regular brush is counted as a line in Tahoma2D, and if you paint with a Smart Raster paintbrush, and the same goes for the bucket fill tool. So Tahoma2D knows the difference between lines and areas, which kind of gives you two layers inside a single drawing, which is such a useful feature in so many ways. And that's why this level type is called a Smart Raster level. And one of the really useful features of having the lines and areas defined separately is that if you make a mistake, you can choose the eraser here on the toolbar. And with the normal type selected, you can choose the mode to erase only the areas only the lines, or both the lines and areas. So I could just erase the area inside the eye there. And there's many other uses for knowing about the distinction of lines from areas, but this is one of the main reasons I prefer Smart Raster for drawing characters. And as I said earlier, the standard raster levels don't know the difference between lines and areas, it's just Smart Raster and vector levels that do. So what do I use vector levels for? Well, let me first hide this Smart Raster level by clicking the table button in the timeline, and then choosing Ctrl S to save all. And vector levels have quite a few great uses, but I don't use them for drawing characters, as the way that vectors work, it can make colouring with them quite tricky. But let me show you two of the things I do use them for. So the first point is that they're great to be able to draw with and edit the drawings easier. So selecting the vector level in the timeline, grab the brush tool, change the size again, and then just draw, and you'll get a really nice looking line. But now, once drawn, you can choose the Control Point Editor tool here on the toolbar, and click on your lines, and then edit them to correct any mistakes or adjust them to look nicer. And it's here you can see why vector lines are clever. They're not just pixels drawn on screen, they're lines following points along a line and the curvature amount between each point. So you can adjust the points by clicking and dragging the individual points, or you can grab the handles and change the curvature, and you won't lose any clarity on the line. And if you zoom into your drawing using your mouse wheel or the zoom on your tablet, you'll see that the line remains clear at every zoom level, unlike drawings on the raster and Smart Raster levels. And after you've zoomed in, you can click this button here at the bottom of the viewer, and that'll reset the zoom so you can see the whole drawing. And I'll make a separate video about drawing with vectors, but hopefully you can already see how powerful they are. But they're also great when using the different fill types, and in particular I use them a lot for gradient fills, for creating simple backgrounds. So let's do that now. But first let's remove the line, and I'll do that this time by clicking the selection tool, and then with the rectangular mode selected, I can click and drag a rectangular box around that line, which highlights it, and then I can just tap the delete key, which removes it. So to show the fill type, let's choose the geometry tool. That's here on the toolbar, and this is available for all level types. And for the shape, we'll choose the rectangle option, but you can see there's quite a few other options in there. And I don't care about the size of the line, as I'll be removing them anyway, so I'll leave it set at 1. The black entry is already selected in the palette entry, so that's fine to use. And let's click and drag to draw a large rectangle. And as you remember from earlier, vectors can be drawn at any size, so I can draw them inside the camera area or outside. And then, as you have to have a different palette entry for each colour in the vector level, I'll need to add a new palette entry here for the gradient colour by clicking the plus button in your palette list. And that copies the previously selected colour again, the black. And then we can choose the bucket fill tool, and with normal selected and areas mode, just click in the middle of that rectangle, and that fills in the rectangle. And notice that once filled, like with the Smart Raster levels, we can change the colour, and the colour on screen will change too. But we don't want a single colour here, So select the Vector Options tab, and in here there's 3 groups of options to use with vector lines and fills. And in the top selection, the last 16 options are for filling areas. All the others are for adjusting the lines. So with the filled colours palette entry selected down here, you can simply choose one of these 16 fills to use instead of the plain fill. And you'll see the fill change on screen as you choose them. And as I've said already for the brushes, do try them all out so you know what they are for when you need them. But be sure to choose the fill types for filled areas and the line types for drawn lines. So if you don't see any change, you've possibly selected the wrong vector option. But the one fill that I'm really interested in at the minute is the linear gradient fill here. So choose that. And notice that this shows a gradient between 2 colours, and the gradient goes from left to right. And we can change these options. So with the palette entry still selected, choose the Style Editor's Settings tab. Firstly, let's bring the smoothness down so you can better see the split between the 2 colours. And then you can change the X position to move the point where the 2 colours meet from left to right. And if you change the angle, you can choose the angle at which they meet. And with the colours separated horizontally, you can change the Y position to move the split between the 2 colours up and down. So let's add some smoothness back between those 2 colours. Like that. But these aren't the colours that we want, so how do we change them? Well, simply click the Colour tab here, and you see it's showing the values for the green colour. So let's change that. And I want a darker green as it happens, because I'm trying to create a grass colour here. And notice the 2 small colour swatches at the bottom left of the Style Editor, and the green one is currently selected, so that's why we're changing the green. That's the first colour. So click the pink one, and then we can change the pink colour, and here I want a lighter green, something like that. So simply switch between the 2 colours and change them to what you need. And then if necessary, go back to the settings to move the colour split up and down, to choose if you want to see more of one colour or the other, and change the smoothness to help define the gradient between those 2 colours. And that's a great way to set up the gradient, but we have a black box around the outside that we don't want. So let's remove that. So just choose the selection tool at the top left here, and then click on the outside of the box somewhere to highlight it, and then we can choose the colour for the line. And to do that, you simply click on one of the colour swatches. And notice that the first colour swatch has this checkerboard pattern, and that's because that's a transparent colour. And that's a special palette entry for transparency. So choosing that, and the line disappears. So if we deselect the rectangle, you'll see there's no longer a black line there. And with that long explanation done, let me quickly add the sky. Choose the black palette entry, choose the geometry option, we'll draw a large rectangle, and then select a new palette entry. From the Vector tab, I'll choose the linear gradient. Fill bucket, let's fill that in. From the settings, bring the smoothing down. Rotate the angle, so the colour is separated horizontally. You can always type in the box if you want to. Choosing the colours, we're trying to create a sky here. So we want a blue for one colour and a lighter blue for the other. Let's change the smoothness to show some gradient between the 2, and then adjust the colours to try and get the colour for the sky that we want. And that'll do just fine. Selection tool, select the rectangle and choose the transparent option. So now the sky is shown behind the green here, and if you want to, you can choose the selection tool and adjust where they join, like that. And although you can see both gradients in the rectangle shown inside and outside of the camera area, to see what the camera sees, you can click the camera button here at the top right of the viewer to crop the screen to only the camera view to get a better view of what your final animation will look like. And if you like, you can choose the drop down and change the opacity if you need to see more or less of what is outside of the camera, which can be extremely useful. But going back to the regular table view, we see all of both rectangles. So to summarise, I use the standard raster levels for backgrounds where I want many different colours and don't want to create a palette entry for each of them, especially if I'm blending colours. I use smart raster levels for drawing and animating my characters, and I use vector levels for their special fills like the gradient fill, and for drawing lines that I want to manipulate later, or for using the automatic in-between tool that I'll show you another time. And I've got one more useful tip to share about the drawing levels, but I'll show you that in a minute. Because that was a very quick rundown of the 3 types of drawing levels, what they might be used for and how you can create them, and a quick look over some of the tools used with them. But if you want to know more, do check out my course on Udemy, where I've got much more detail about each level type, their uses and specific features, and how the tools work differently on each one. And you can see the list of lessons and even watch some of them for free before buying, so you can see the style of the lessons and get a feel for the course, so do take a look at those. And included in the course are many useful downloads to supplement the demos, including this document that I've just updated that describes exactly the differences between level types. So follow the link in the description or comments below to see that. So before I go, one last tip. There are quite a lot of tools shown in the toolbar, not all of which are used on all level types. But when you first start, you don't know which you can use. So if you choose the wrong tool, you will be warned, but it is just irritating to get them mixed up and not know what you can use. So what I recommend doing is to head over to the Preferences in the File menu, go to the Tools section, and change the option in the Toolbar Display Behavior drop-down. From default to either the option to show all of the tools but disabled if they're not available for the level type, or to actually hide them if you can't use them on the current level type. Personally, I like to just disable them so they don't jump around as I change levels. I think that makes it easier to find each tool. But with the preferences open, you can try it out by clicking on the drawing in each level type to see what difference it makes. So I hope you found today's video useful. If you did, do give it a thumbs up. That'll make it easier for the video to spread around and help other users. So today we created a single drawing on the timeline for each level type and looked into some of the tools that you can use to draw with. And don't forget, you can use all 3 level types in a single shot. So go ahead, try out all the level types, learn their features and quirks, and mix and match them in your animations. And I hope you can join me next time as we take a look at the timeline, how the layers work, and how to set up and move your drawings. And that's a guarantee.